Imagine this, you're lying on your deathbed. Every doctor has given up hope, and there's nothing more anyone can do. Your body is deteriorating, and you know that in just a few hours, it could all be over. But then something incredible happens, something that defies logic and science. A figure appears at the foot of your bed, radiating light and peace. And in that moment, you realize that miracles are not just stories from ancient texts, but are happening right now in your life. This is exactly what happened to a man who, at the lowest point in his life, encountered Jesus Christ. But here's the catch. This man wasn't even Christian. He was a Muslim businessman, wealthy and successful, but utterly powerless in the face of death. And what he experienced would change his life forever, not just physically, but spiritually. This is the story of how one man's miraculous healing led to an even greater transformation of the heart. Before diving into the miraculous event itself, let's take a step back and look at who this man was. We're talking about a successful businessman in his mid-30s who had achieved what many could only dream of. He was a self-made millionaire, living in a world where wealth equates to power. For most of his life, he believed that with enough money, you could control anything, except for what came next. The false security of wealth. It's easy to feel invincible when you're on top of the world. When your bank account is full and you have the admiration of those around you, it's tempting to believe that nothing can bring you down. But life has a funny way of showing us just how fragile we really are. In this case, the man's seemingly perfect life came crashing down when he was diagnosed with an extreme case of shingles, herpes zoster. Let's pause for a moment here and think about this. Imagine having everything, money, power, success, only to realize that none of it matters when your health is on the line. This is something many of us can relate to. Whether it's a sudden illness or a personal crisis, there are moments in life when we realize just how little control we have. When the illness struck, it wasn't just a mild case of shingles. This was the worst case the doctors at Toronto General Hospital had ever seen. His immune system had completely shut down, and his body was covered in painful, burning blisters from head to toe. He was isolated in a sterile hospital room where doctors could do nothing but watch his condition worsen. His temperature spiked to a life-threatening 107.6 degrees, 42 degrees Celsius, and his nervous system became so hypersensitive that even a single strand of hair touching his skin caused excruciating pain. The limitations of modern medicine. Despite all the advances in modern medicine, there are still illnesses that stump even the most skilled doctors. In this case, they had no choice but to wait and hope. But hope was running out. His body was failing him, and the doctors knew it. In hushed tones, they told his family that he wouldn't make it through the night. If, by some miracle, he did survive, he would likely be blind, deaf, partially paralyzed, or suffer permanent brain damage from the fever. Here, I can't help but reflect on how many people find themselves in similar situations, where medical science has no answers, and they're left with nothing but fear and uncertainty. It's in these moments that we often turn to something greater, something beyond ourselves, in search of hope. And then it happened. In the darkest hours of the night, when death seemed imminent, something incredible occurred. The man awoke to find a figure standing at the foot of his bed. This figure wasn't a doctor or a nurse. No, this was someone entirely different. The room was filled with a radiant, blinding light. And even though he couldn't see the figure's face, he knew instantly who it was. Jesus Christ. Now let's take a moment to consider this. This man was not a Christian. He had grown up in a Muslim household where Jesus was respected as a prophet but not believed to be the Son of God. Yet in that moment, there was no doubt in his mind. He knew that the figure standing before him was none other than Jesus. Divine intervention beyond religious boundaries. This is where the story gets even more fascinating. Why would Jesus appear to a Muslim man on his deathbed? Why not send an angel? Or why not appear to someone who already believed in him? This moment defies logic, but that's the point. Miracles don't always fit into the neat little boxes we create for them. They transcend boundaries, whether those boundaries are religious, cultural, or even scientific. Jesus didn't speak many words. He simply said, "I am the Lord of the Christians. I am the Lord of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And with that, he was gone. At this point, the man wasn't healed. His body was still in pain, his fever still raging. But something had changed. There was peace, an overwhelming sense of peace that he couldn't explain. It was as if, for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. The next morning, the doctors were stunned. The virus had suddenly stopped progressing. The blisters, which had been multiplying rapidly the day before, had halted in their tracks. His immune system, which had been failing, started to show signs of recovery. They had no explanation for it. The man, however, knew exactly what had happened. Jesus had intervened. The process of healing. The road to full recovery wasn't instantaneous. He was still weak and in pain, and the doctors warned him that it would take months, possibly years, for his body to fully heal. They gave him a cocktail of medications and told him to avoid going outside as his skin was still vulnerable. But something miraculous continued to happen. Each day, his body healed faster than anyone expected. Within a week, the blisters began to fall off, revealing smooth, unscarred skin underneath. His vision and hearing remained intact, his paralysis subsided, and there was no sign of brain damage. In fact, he was healthier than before he had gotten sick. This is where the story shifts from a physical healing to a spiritual one. Even after his miraculous recovery, the man couldn't stop thinking about that night. Who was Jesus really? Was he just a prophet as he had been taught, or was he truly the Son of God? These questions plagued him day and night. He began to seek answers, turning on the TV one morning and stumbling upon a Christian program that asked, "Is Jesus the Son of God?" The quest for truth. This is where the man's journey took a deeper turn. He couldn't rest until he found out more about this Jesus who had saved his life. He started reading the Bible, starting with the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then moving through the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. He devoured every word, seeking to understand who Jesus really was. At this point, let's pause and reflect. How often do we seek answers to life's biggest questions, only when we're faced with a crisis? For many, it takes hitting rock bottom before they begin to search for something greater than themselves. This man's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes it's in our weakest moments that we find the greatest truths. Let's step back and analyze this story from a broader perspective. What does it mean for a non-believer to experience such a profound encounter with Jesus? This isn't just a story about physical healing. It's a story about spiritual awakening. Many people might dismiss the idea of miracles, but what we can't deny is the impact they have on the people who experience them. Faith versus science. There's often a tension between faith and science, especially when it comes to miracles. In this case, medical professionals were left baffled. There was no scientific explanation for how this man had recovered so quickly and so completely. But does that mean we should simply dismiss it as unexplainable and move on? Or could it be that miracles and science don't have to be mutually exclusive? From a philosophical standpoint, this story raises important questions about the nature of faith. Can faith alone lead to healing? And if so, what role does science play? There are countless stories of people who have experienced miraculous healings that defy medical explanation. And while science may not always have the answers, faith can provide the hope and strength needed to persevere. Perhaps the greatest miracle in this story isn't the physical healing, but the transformation of the man's heart. After reading the Bible and learning more about Jesus, he came to a life-altering conclusion. Jesus wasn't just a prophet, he was indeed the Son of God. This realization led him to convert to Christianity, leaving behind the faith he had been raised in. This part of the story is particularly powerful because it demonstrates how miracles aren't just about physical healing. They're about something much deeper, a spiritual awakening that changes a person from the inside out. For this man, the miracle wasn't just that he survived, it was that his life was forever changed. To further illustrate the impact of miracles, let's look at a few more real-life examples of people who have experienced similar miraculous events. The case of Father John Paul Robinson. Father John Paul Robinson was diagnosed with terminal cancer, given only months to live. His parish began praying for a miracle, and within weeks, his cancer went into complete remission. Doctors were left stunned with no explanation for his sudden recovery. The story of Dwayne Miller. Dwayne Miller was a pastor who lost his voice due to a viral infection, leaving him unable to preach. After 3 years of silence, he was invited to speak at a small church service. As he began reading from Psalm 103, his voice miraculously returned, completely healed. Doctors couldn't explain how it happened, but Dwayne attributes it to divine intervention. These stories, like the one we're discussing today, show that miracles aren't just relics of the past. They're happening today, in the lives of ordinary people. And while not every miracle is as dramatic as these, they remind us that there is more to life than what we can see and measure. So, what can we take away from this story? First, it reminds us that miracles are real. They may not always look like what we expect, but they happen. Sometimes they come in the form of physical healing, and other times they come in the form of a spiritual awakening that transforms a person's entire life. Second, this story challenges us to think about our own lives. Have you ever experienced something that defied explanation? Do you believe in miracles? And if not, what would it take to convince you? As we close, I want to leave you with one final thought. Whether or not you believe in miracles, one thing is clear. There is something incredibly powerful about the human spirit. When we are faced with impossible odds, it's often our faith, our hope, and our belief in something greater that carries us through. If this story touched you, or if you've ever experienced something similar, share it in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about faith, healing, and the power of miracles. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire and uplift.